We all know the comment period for unfinished frames and receivers has ended, but now let's look at Polymer80's NPRM comments. Welcome back to the channel. My name is John Crump. I am the heavyweight champion of journalism. I'm also an avid Funko Pop collector and a gun rights activist. I look at the ATF, FBI, and all the agencies and organizations that want to violate your God-given and constitutionally protected right to bear arms. I'm also the owner of Black Swan Tactical, and at Black Swan Tactical, we sell awesome patches, like the 2AEDU patch, the Ever Vigilant Crumpy patch, the Future Felons of America patch. Also, we are sponsored by Tusk. Tusk, TUSC, is a cryptocurrency focused on the firearms market. With that out of the way, I am almost to 10,000 subscribers. If you can get me there, I would appreciate it. So if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe, turn on all notifications, ring that bell, give this video a big thumbs up for me. And with that, let's jump into the comments. All right, so Poly80 is the company that's most affected by this, along with JSD, Defense Distributed, and some other companies. But I got Poly80's comments, and we're going to go over them because they make a lot of the same arguments as the bump stock case, and we'll see. All right, so the first thing that Poly80 points out is that the GCA, Gun Control Act of 1968, never meant to regulate firearms parts. Not only does it not state anything about firearms parts, but Poly80 actually got part of the debate where Senator Dodd said that it's impractical to regulate firearms parts, which is kind of a genius move that they're turning the GCA against the ATF. So I really like that. I thought that was an awesome move by them. They also point out that weapons parts kits are not regulated under the GCA and were not intended to be regulated under the GCA because they never talked about that. So the ATF claims that these weapons parts kits are designed to be readily convertible to fire a projectile. Polymer80 counters that by saying that these weapons parts kits, I'm going to stop doing the finger quotes now, are not readily convertible because the ATF is trying to change the term of converted, right? Because in the statutory definitions, there's a different thing between convert and assemble. These weapons parts kits, said I was going to stop doing it, but I did anyway, are assembled. They're not converted. And in NFA, for example, they make a distinction between assembled and converted. So now the ATF is trying to mix everything together, which Polymer80 says they can't do. I have a tendency to agree with that, but I'm also a gun rights activist, right? They also state that the ATF has zero deference when it comes to this. Chevron deference, I've done tons of videos on it. Everyone's done tons of videos, but it's a case dealing with Chevron oil. But it gives the regulatory places the right to interpret regulations, and the court can't really go against that if the rule is ambiguous, which this is not, and it's not criminal, which this is. So Polymer80 is pointing out that they don't have Chevron deference in this case. They have zero deference. Same thing as the guy who farms chickens, who brings me eggs, who happens to be the lawyer on the bump stock case, argues. And they even cite the same case. Can't talk today. They cite United States versus Appel, and that basically deals with deference in criminal cases, saying that the government can't use deference in criminal cases, and this is exactly what the ATF is trying to do. I thought that was a pretty good move. I'm pretty sure Poly80 lawyers must have read the bump stock case because they're smart, and that's what smart lawyers do. And if the bump stock case succeeds, this whole thing goes away because they can't use deference. So that's why the bump stock case is so important. A lot of people said, who cares about bump stocks? Well, that's why you should care about bump stocks. Polymer80 also says that the ATF is violating the Administrative Procedure Act, the APA. The APA says a bunch of stuff, but it also says some stuff that applies in this case. One, if a regulatory agency departs from prior policies, they have to explain why. And they never really explained why. We all know why the Biden administration ordered the ATF to change the regulations, but that isn't a legal reason to do so, because you cannot use deference to change a definition to meet an administrative goal. That's not permitted under the APA. In fact, Rob Olson, the chicken farmer, argues that in the bump stock case, which I think is a good idea to argue this here, because it's the same exact damn thing. Like Trump said to the ATF to get rid of bump stocks, Biden is saying to the ATF, get rid of ghost guns. It's the same thing. So if the bump stock case wins, this whole thing is moot, but we have to win there first. It's a good thing that Polymer80 is arguing the same thing, because it makes sense. It also says, Polymer80 says that the rule cannot go into effect because they didn't give adequate considerations to the alternative when engaging in rulemaking. One of the alternatives they listed was no change. But do you really believe the ATF and the Biden administration would go with no change? I don't, and the ATF certainly didn't. And Polymer80 points out that they didn't give adequate consideration to that. Also, they didn't do a proper cost analysis. Cost-benefit analysis, CBA, is something that they had to do for everything. Polymer80 says that the government screwed up when doing a CBA on the cost to the government itself. But we're not going to get into that right now. We're going to get into two things that they didn't talk about. They didn't talk about the cost to you and me, the general public, and they didn't talk about the cost to companies in the industry. So they really, really need to factor in those costs, and they didn't do that. So they didn't have a proper cost benefit analysis on this. They also say that it violates the due process rights of the company by not providing sufficient notice of change. Basically, they have to give sufficient notice of change in case anything needs to be challenged or anything, and they're not really doing that. So the company says it violates due process for not only me and you, but also for the companies. And the final thing that they say is that it violates the Second Amendment. And it really does, if you think about it. It basically takes part manufacturers and parts companies off the market. It shuts them down. And with them shut down, that means that there's less parts and less of a way for you and I to exercise our rights. It basically means we have to buy a gun. We can't make guns anymore, which is very un-American. Firearms have been made in this country ever since the country was founded, and even before it was founded. And this is most likely the goal of the rule, is to crack down on our right to bear arms, which they shouldn't do. All right, the comment period has ended for this rule, but the comment period for pistol stabilizing braces are still open, and I encourage everyone out there to go submit a comment on pistol braces. All right, with that said, I have a Patreon. If you like what I do here, go to my Patreon and you can help me out to cover the news. I also have a join button below, which has been requested. I don't know why anybody would request it, but they did. So if you want to give money through this and join the membership and get free patches and stuff like that for the $5 or more membership, go ahead and hit the join button, join on my Patreon. Go over to John Crump Live. John Crump Live, we do a lot of really cool stuff, and you can go over there and watch my videos, and there's a join button over there too. So there's lots of ways to help out and lots of ways to support me, but the biggest thing you can do is get the word out and let everyone know. All right, stay ever safe, stay ever vigilant, stay ever free, keep in the fight, and Wolverines, mother...